Hey everybody, welcome to Jacob's Quest, and today I just finished watching episode 6 of Ms. Marvel. This is the season/series finale. I'm assuming it's the series finale, because this is all going to get picked up again in The Marvels, which is Captain Marvel 2, I guess. And yeah, okay, so it's obviously full spoilers, and we're just going to jump right into it. Alright, there's a lot of stuff to talk about here. But let's just handle the actual plot of the episode and what happened, and then we'll go into I think the more interesting things that happen at the very end of this episode. So first off, walking into this, I was not entirely sure exactly what they're gonna do, because in the last episode, or episode 5, they seemingly cleaned up, I mean, a lot of the stuff that was being set up as the main threat, the main conflict, the main antagonist, the clandestines were all dead. The portal that was threatening our reality was closed. And I was like, so what even happens now? What's literally, what do you do for your last episode if all the threats are gone? And this episode turns out to be entirely about trying to help Kamran run away from the Department of Damage Control, because now they're hunting him down. As we saw at the end of last episode, the drone attacked the building, and basically that's the whole plot of the episode, just trying to help Kamran get away. She calls the Red Daggers, Kamala calls the Red Daggers, and they're like, okay, we have someone at the dock who can help him get out of there, take him back to Pakistan, and he'll be free, right? And I thought that was going to be a big reveal, whoever's at the dock, but no, we never see whoever's at the dock, so that was, that wasn't anything. But yeah, basically it's a big chase throughout their high school, and it's kind of cool. They get everyone to come back, and everyone has part of the big plan where they all dress the same, and they use fire extinguishers basically to just stall and buy time enough for them to escape, right? My first thing is that her brother and her friends and everyone gets arrested at some point during this whole high school chase, and I was like, oh man, so their lives are over, because at least according to this government agency, they're gonna say, oh, you aided a known threat or something, oh, so their lives are screwed now because they got arrested for this. But I guess it's fine because what ends up happening is that Kamran, he doesn't turn evil really, but he kind of he gets really pissed off, and he starts attacking a lot of the soldiers, and then Kamala has to save some of the soldiers because he was about to actually kill them. And I thought there was going to be this big face off where now they have to fight each other, and then that doesn't happen either really. They just he just kind of loses control, I guess, or he's just really upset, so he sends out this wave of destruction, and then she has to save people that he almost gets killed, right? And then ultimately what she ends up doing is she ends up creating this little bubble around both of them, and she punches a hole into the ground, and then kind of like Bugs Bunny, he just has to go in the hole, and I guess we have to assume that the hole somehow leads to the docks. I'm not exactly sure how that worked out, logistically. Okay, he goes down underground, and I guess from there he has to find his way to the docks, or maybe she used her powers and made the tunnel go right to I don't know how that works exactly. Anyways, and that's pretty much how the main conflict ends. I mean, it's a pretty cool action sequence. There's trucks flying around, and the Department of Damage Control is using their sound wave guns, but then when they go outside they start using actual guns, which kind of but the other thing about this is that the blonde agent lady, who I don't remember if she even was given a name. I assume she was given a name. She was told to stand down, and throughout the entire show she's been the one who's she's always riding that line of she's vaguely racist, she's very antagonistic, and it's the other agent, the main guy who was in the Spider-Man movie, he seems a lot more cool and understanding about everything, and be no, we're not going to try to upset these people. We know that other government agencies are already monitoring them, and It's like this whole messed up situation. But this lady is like, she's I don't know, she's like antagonistic and rude and kind of racist, and it's like, what's happening with this lady? I don't, like, they don't ever like go into it, and they, she's not given like a character really, but she's just kind of an asshole, anyway, so she goes against orders and she tries to take them all down, and at the end of the conflict he calls her and he's like, okay, stand down, you're relieved of your duty, you disobeyed orders, you attacked a bunch of high schoolers. So I guess maybe that's why none of her friends get charged with anything, because like they were arrested and they escaped the back of the van during the conflict, and I guess it's like, well, she wasn't supposed to be doing any of this anyway, so maybe that's why they're not charged with anything. I don't know. But yeah, I kind of wish we got to see what happened to this lady, because it's like, I hope she doesn't still work there, right? Like, cause that was just, ugh, I don't know. She was a good antagonist, because she was instantly unlikable, but it was kind of interesting that this is the direction the show went, where it's like the whole djinn and the clandestine and like the whole mystical threat of it all, that was kind of just neatly dealt with before the finale happened, and now we're kind of just dealing with this lady and her like weird racist attack against these kids, and anyways, so yeah, Kamran gets away, and everyone seems to be doing fine, like they show like 1 week later, everyone's kind of celebrating that, like, oh sorry, there's this one moment where like Kamran gets away, she puts down the bubble, and all the officers are about to move in, but then the crowd of people, her family, who at this point is now, everyone knows who she is, everyone knows that she's Miss Marvel, right? Which is a name she doesn't go by yet, she's still going by the Light Bride or something. They all move in on her, and then they all like all her friends and family and everyone in the neighborhood surrounds her and like basically protects her from being arrested until she can get away. So it was like this really cool moment of like, even some of the cops that were there stand up against the damage control, which I was like, that's interesting. I mean, I guess she did save a couple of the cops, so maybe that makes sense. I don't know. But yeah, she was able to get away, and like that was a really cool moment that like her whole community came around her and protected her. And then after that, they show like this montage of different TikToks and Instagrams of people going like, oh, we have our own superhero, like a superhero that belongs to our community, and I thought that was really cool to see, but yeah, 1 week later, Kamran's in Pakistan, he's meeting up with the Red Dagger, and I assume that's going to be a thing maybe in another season of TV, or they'll pick that up somewhere. I don't know when or where, but that will be a thing that comes back up. They wouldn't like leave that lingering for no reason. And then yeah, all her friends are fine. Her oh, what is the kid's name? The smart guy. What's his name? He's going to Caltech. He has Kamran's car, which I thought was funny. He's like, oh no, he told me I could have the car. They're like, no, he didn't. He's like, yeah, he told. We bonded, like we became friends. He gave me his car. I thought that was pretty funny. And yeah, basically everything seems fine. Everything seems normal. And then here we got like 5 seconds left of the episode, and everything seems to be wrapping up really well, and I was like surprised that despite the fact that the main antagonist and everything like that had already been dealt with before the episode airs, it was actually a pretty decent finale. I was like, okay, they got enough action in there, they got everyone rallying back together, everything feels like it came full circle. I was actually pretty happy with it, but I was still like, okay, but there's gonna be like one last little bomb drop of like, oh, okay, something happening here at the end of the series, right? Like what are we really building up to? So we get two things, and here's the big thing. So I cannot remember his name, the smart kid, her friend, he stops her and he's like, okay, so your dad wanted to know if he could have superpowers, which is funny because her dad's a really great character. I wish we got more of the dad. That was funny. He's like, he wanted to know if he could have superpowers, and so I took another look at your DNA, and there's a mutation in there, and as soon as he says the words mutation, some of the background music kind of like riffs into like this kind of a remix of the X-Men tone, the you know, like we get like a little, you know, a little bit of that as soon as he says mutation, and then she's like, oh, it'll just be another label, and then that's the last they talk about it. And you know, he says specifically that, like, you know, like, we compared your blood to the rest of your families and yours is still a little different. So it looks like they're trying to say that she's, you know, she can access the Noor and the light and all that stuff because she's a Jinn, you know, like her mom and her grandma, like that family line. But they're also saying, like, on top of that, there's something else different, which, you know, so they're trying to say that she's a mutant, right? Like they said the word mutation, she's a mutant, right? The thing about that, I'm wondering, is like, so, I mean, what, you know, it's still pretty unclear because Kamran was displaying powers very similar to hers. So I'm wondering, like, so what does that mean power wise? You know, like, have we not seen the full extent of what she can do? And what about the bangle unlocking something? You know, like they had this whole discussion about how, like, oh, it looks like the bangle just unlocked whatever was already there, you know, which of course that brings us to like Inhuman stuff, you know. So this is gonna be like a whole discussion, I know, that's gonna be like across the internet, like, okay, so hold on. In the comics, she's an Inhuman, you know, and they have to use the Terrigenesis gases in order to unlock their abilities. Whereas mutants are born with the mutant X gene, which usually sometime around puberty is when, like, that gene just activates and they get a power, right? So in this MCU Kamala case, what they're doing now is she is part of the clandestine. She puts on the bangle. The bangle activates, you know, it like activates something in her DNA that was already there, you know, the whole clandestine part, right? And that gives her access to these light abilities. But on top of that, they're saying that there's a mutant X gene in there, you know. So you know, like it's cool, but it's also like I have so many more questions now. Like, so what is her, you know, like, what does that mean for her power? Like, what is the bangle doing? Because clearly the bangle is still doing something. It still lights up. And if it's not giving her powers, what's the bangle actually doing now? And what does her mutant abilities do? You know, like, how does that make her different than her family actually? Like, if her mom or her grandma put on that bangle, would it not also just give them light powers, you know? And then what about Kamran? He got light powers, but he was hit with, like, I don't know, like a wave from the portal collapsing or something. I have a lot of questions. I just have like so many questions as to what's happening here. So that's really cool, you know, like, it's cool that they're starting. It's like, I guess we, you know, obviously Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, we had Charles Xavier there, right? You know, we had Black Bolt and Charles Xavier, so we had both an Inhuman and a mutant in that movie. And now in here, it looks like, okay, so we have a mutant / also other things, you know. She's like this hybrid of like 3 different things going on, which is interesting. So that's one thing. Okay, so the second big thing that we get at the end of this, which I still don't fully understand exactly what I'm looking at here in this scene. I've watched it twice and it's hard to entirely understand what's going on. All right, so here's exactly what happens. So this is the mid-credit scene, and okay, so she's in her bedroom. She's in her Miss Marvel costume. Her bangle starts activating. It starts doing something weird. You know, lights are moving. It starts doing like crazy noises and stuff. And so she gets up, and she's like, okay. And then they do some kind of warp effect where it's hard to understand, like, is she teleporting or is she shape-shifting? Because in the comics, Miss Marvel, when she first gets her powers, she comes out looking like Captain Marvel, because that's like who she wanted to be, you know. So she like was shapeshifted into looking like Captain Marvel. You know, she had blonde hair and everything, right? And it wasn't until later that she changed to look more like her normal self, right? So I don't know if that's what they're doing here. I don't know if they're saying that like, oh, her powers are, you know, changing even more, and now she's morphed into Captain Marvel, because they do like a warp effect. She gets thrown into her closet, and then she walks out, and it is Brie Larson's Captain Marvel who walks out of the closet. So that's one thing. The other thing is that like, or is this actually teleporting? You know, is this some kind of weird transportation thing that's happening, where did they switch sides wherever they were at? Because she gets thrown into the closet, Brie Larson walks out, and she's not in her, you know, it's not in a Miss Marvel costume, it's in the Captain Marvel costume, like the original one, right? And she picks up like this broken piece of the door, and it's like a poster of her face, and she's like, oh no, right? And and then that's it, and then like it ends. So I'm like, so what happened here? Am I looking at a Captain Marvel who was just teleported here, or am I looking at Kamala who is like transformed into looking like Captain Marvel? I don't understand what this scene is implying or what's happening here, you know? And the interesting thing is that like this almost feels like a scene that's actually part of a movie, you know? Like I don't know if like the cinematography was actually different here, but it almost feels like this is actually part of the Marvels, you know, that the sequel to Captain Marvel. It feels like it's part of that movie, you know? So I don't, you know, we're missing a lot of context, obviously, and you know, we're meant to be like, what's happening? But really, I don't know who this is. I don't know if this is Kamala transformed, or if this is Captain Marvel who's been teleported here, you know? And I looked at the scene again, and it's like there's like a warp effect where she seems to disappear for a second, and then she's thrown into the closet, and, you know, the closet like breaks and bursts open, and then here comes Brie Larson. She walks out. So I'm like, what? It's very interesting, and it's definitely got me wondering, you know. And I figured we would get a Brie Larson cameo. I thought Captain Marvel would come down and say, hey, your Bengals reacting to something in space, and I need you to come to space or something, you know. Like I thought it was gonna kind of end like that, but we got like a version of that, I guess, kind of. Nothing about space, but her Bengal was reacting to something, and then suddenly she's Brie Larson, or at the very least Brie Larson was teleported there. I don't know. I don't know. I really don't quite know what I'm looking at. Yeah, so it ended very, very interestingly, and I will say this. I had my doubts that this show would be able to wrap up in a satisfying way, because so much of like the main conflict was already dealt with, but I was surprised. I was actually genuinely surprised, and I was like, you know what? It ended really nicely. You know, even before all of the two little Easter egg things that had me wondering about things. It ended really nicely, and then on top of that, we got our little like MCU, like, ooh, what's happening next, you know? So we have mutant related stuff, and we have Captain Marvel related stuff. And I honestly don't know where they're going with this, but they got me intrigued. They got me asking questions, and I'll say this. Now that the show ended, I think I like it a lot more than I did like last episode. Last episode, I was pretty down on the show, because I was like, oh man, it started so strong, and then it kind of just went downhill like for the last 2 episodes, and I was like, man, that sucks. But somehow they managed to stick the landing, and I was like, okay, you did it. You did a good job. You brought it all back. All the characters that I was liking, they all came back. Everyone worked together. Even the bully, I forget her name. I don't remember what her name is, but the girl who's like really popular, and Kamala saved her in the first episode. Even she came back, which was funny. She just showed up. Like they're like, what are you even doing here? She's like, oh, I filmed my TikToks in the, you know, like she came out of nowhere, and suddenly like, okay, I guess you're part of this too. But yeah, I really enjoyed this episode, and I'm definitely left with questions. I'm curious what the main consensus is going to be. Are people going to be upset that Kamala is definitely not an Inhuman and now is a mutant, kind of, sort of? at least halfway a mutant kind of thing. And what do people think is going on in that final scene with Brie Larson, Captain Marvel? Like, was that a transformation or was that a teleportation? Because the way they did the effect, it's honestly hard to tell which one it is for me. So I don't know. I wonder what everyone's gonna decide on that. Yeah, let me know what you guys thought about Miss Marvel. Let me know what you thought about those crazy Easter eggs at the end, and where the hell is this all going? What's gonna happen next in the Marvels? Yeah, very curious to see what you guys think about this ending. I liked it though. I liked the episode, so that's good. All right, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.